Welcome to Shadow Frames, where forgotten images reveal their darkest secrets. The photograph sits unassumingly in a weathered album, its sepia tones muted by the passage of more than a century. Dated 1902, it captures what should have been a simple birthday celebration. A young girl, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, seated primly in a wooden chair. Unlike many portraits from the Edwardian era, where subjects maintained rigid poses and solemn expressions, this child breaks convention with a genuine smile that brightens her face beneath a carefully arranged head of curls. She wears a white celebration dress with intricate lacework, typical of upper-middle-class families of the period. A small pendant hangs from her neck, possibly a birthday gift. The setting appears to be a photographer's studio, with the painted backdrop depicting a garden scene that was fashionable during the early 1900s. But it's what rests upon her right shoulder that transforms this innocent birthday memento into something altogether disturbing. A hand, adult-sized, male by all appearances, grips her shoulder with what seems to be familiarity. The fingers are long, the knuckles slightly pronounced, and the cuff of a dark jacket sleeve is barely visible at the edge. Yet the hand connects to nothing. No arm extends from it. No body stands behind the child. The studio backdrop is clearly visible in the space where a person should be. The photographer's composition shows no signs of manipulation or double exposure that might explain this anomaly. The hand simply exists, disconnected from any physical form, yet undeniably present as it rests upon the birthday girl's shoulder. Most unsettling is that the girl shows no awareness of anything amiss. Her smile remains carefree, her posture relaxed. The hand appears to belong in the scene, as though its owner stands just beyond what our eyes can perceive. According to the faded inscription on the photograph's reverse, written in elegant period handwriting, this was Elizabeth's 8th birthday, June 1902. No mention of anything unusual, no explanation for what cannot possibly exist. The provenance of the photograph remains frustratingly obscure. It appeared in an estate sale collection in New England 5 years ago, purchased among dozens of anonymous family photographs by a collector of Edwardian portraiture. Only when cataloging his acquisition did he notice the impossible detail that had somehow escaped previous owners' attention. Who was Elizabeth? What happened in that photographer's studio in 1902? Most importantly, to whom did the hand belong, and why does it appear without its owner? The photograph offers few clues beyond its disturbing visual contradiction. Some questions reach beyond rational explanation, touching the boundaries where our understanding of reality begins to fray. This birthday portrait from 1902, with its smiling child and its impossible disembodied hand, may be one such case, a visual record of something that bridges worlds we cannot fully comprehend. After the photograph's discovery, rumors began circulating among collectors of Victorian and Edwardian memorabilia. Some claimed it was merely a photographic error or a clever manipulation created by an ambitious studio photographer experimenting with new techniques. After all, the early 1900s were a time of innovation in photography, with enterprising artists constantly pushing the boundaries of their craft. But photographic experts who examined the image found no evidence of tampering. The paper stock, chemical composition, and development process all authenticated it as genuinely from 1902. The disembodied hand was captured in the original exposure, not added later. Research into Elizabeth's identity yielded disturbing possibilities. Census records from Massachusetts revealed 3 families with daughters named Elizabeth of appropriate age. 2 lived unremarkable lives, but the third, Elizabeth Harmon of Salem, perished in a house fire just 3 months after the photograph's date. Newspaper accounts described how the child's bedroom erupted in flames while the rest of the house remained untouched. Her body was found clutching a birthday pendant identical to the one in the photograph. More curious still was the testimony from Elizabeth's mother, preserved in police records from the investigation. She claimed her daughter had been speaking of a shadow friend in the weeks before her death. The mother initially dismissed these conversations as childish imagination, but grew concerned when Elizabeth described how this friend would place his hand on her shoulder when he visited at night. The photographer's identity created another layer of mystery. Records identified him as Thaddeus Winslow, whose studio operated on Essex Street from 1896 until 1904. Winslow himself vanished without explanation, abandoning a successful business. His journal, discovered in the studio's basement during renovations in 1952, contained increasingly frantic entries about disturbances in his photographs. "Something watches through my camera," he wrote in his final entry. "It reaches through from elsewhere. God help me, I've given it passage." The journal also mentioned an unusual client who arranged for young Elizabeth's birthday portrait, a tall gentleman who paid in gold coins and insisted on specific arrangements for the sitting. Winslow never recorded the man's name, describing him only as having remarkable hands and eyes that seemed to look through rather than at you. Salem's history of superstition and witchcraft allegations makes the photograph's origins even more disquieting. Local folklore specialists noted that 19th century spiritualists believed photographs could capture entities existing between worlds. The photograph's creation occurred during a revival of spiritualist practices in New England, when seances and attempts to contact the deceased became fashionable among certain social circles. Perhaps most telling was the discovery of additional photographs from Winslow's studio. 3 other portraits from the same period show similar anomalies, partial manifestations of figures that shouldn't be there. In each case, the subject died under unusual circumstances within months of their sitting. The disembodied hand on Elizabeth's shoulder seems less a photographic curiosity and more a harbinger, a sign that something had already claimed her, reaching through from a place beyond our understanding, patiently waiting to draw her fully into its realm. Modern analysis tools have allowed us to extract additional details previously invisible to casual examination. Under digital enhancement, faint impressions appear in the background of Elizabeth's portrait, symbols etched into the painted garden backdrop, nearly imperceptible to the naked eye. These markings resemble ancient sigils documented in several occult texts popular among New England's secretive metaphysical societies of the late 19th century. More revealing was the pendant around Elizabeth's neck. Initially appearing to be a simple locket, magnification reveals it bears an unusual motif, concentric circles surrounding what appears to be an eye. This symbol matches descriptions from Winslow's journal of the watchful eye that pierces the veil, referenced multiple times in his later entries. The Harmon family history uncovered additional connections. Elizabeth's maternal grandfather, Jeremiah Cook, maintained correspondence with several prominent spiritualists of the era. Letters discovered in the Massachusetts Historical Society archives reveal his obsession with communicating with his deceased wife. One letter, dated February 1902, just months before Elizabeth's portrait, mentions his excitement about new methods to thin the boundary and references preparing the child as a vessel. Salem town records indicate the Harmon home was built upon land once occupied by a meeting house where, in 1692, 5 individuals accused of witchcraft were temporarily imprisoned before their trials. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted in 1998 detected unusual disturbances in the soil structure beneath what would have been Elizabeth's bedroom, anomalies consistent with tunnels or chambers that don't appear in any architectural plans. Thaddeus Winslow's background proved equally troubling. Before establishing his photography business, he studied briefly under William Mumler, the controversial spirit photographer who claimed to capture ghosts on film. Though Mumler was later discredited for fraud, Winslow remained convinced of the camera's ability to document the supernatural. His earlier work in Boston included photographing seances and purported manifestations for the New England Spiritualist Association. The final pages of Winslow's journal, previously thought illegible due to water damage, yielded to modern restoration techniques. His deteriorating handwriting describes how certain clients sought him out specifically for his sensitive plates that could capture those who wait between worlds. He writes of Elizabeth's session with increasing distress. "The child sees what my lens sees. While others notice nothing amiss, she watched something move behind my camera, smiling as though greeting a beloved relative. When I asked whom she saw, she said only, 'He's been waiting for me since before I was born.' I felt the temperature drop as I pressed the shutter. God forgive me for what I've allowed into this world." The hand itself, when examined by forensic anthropologists, displays anatomical inconsistencies, subtle but significant. The proportions of the fingers exceed normal human measurements by approximately 11%. The angle of grip on Elizabeth's shoulder would require the attached arm to be positioned impossibly if belonging to a living person. Most haunting was the discovery last year of a previously unknown letter from Elizabeth's mother to her sister, written the night before the fire. In trembling script, she describes waking to find Elizabeth standing at her bedroom window at midnight, whispering to someone outside. When asked, the child turned with an uncharacteristic expression and said, "He's coming to take me home tomorrow. He says I never belonged here anyway." The photograph found its way to Dr. Eleanor Winters, a cognitive archaeologist specializing in historical trauma encoded in cultural artifacts. Her assessment opened troubling new dimensions to the mystery. "The girl's smile isn't natural," Dr. Winters noted in her analysis. "It's not happiness, it's resignation. Children who experience prolonged psychological manipulation exhibit this precise expression. Elizabeth isn't celebrating, she's surrendering." Dr. Winters identified the specific positioning of the disembodied hand as ritualistically significant. The thumb rests precisely at the junction of shoulder and neck, where ancient Mesopotamian beliefs located the passage through which spirits could enter or exit the body. In several mystical traditions, this is called the doorway point. Elizabeth's school records, preserved in Salem's educational archives, revealed another unsettling pattern. Her teacher noted increasingly withdrawn behavior beginning in January 1902, 5 months before the photograph. The girl began drawing identical images repeatedly, a tall, featureless figure with extraordinarily long hands. When asked who this represented, she reportedly answered, "The man who watches me from inside the mirrors." More alarming was a series of incidents documented by the school nurse. Elizabeth developed inexplicable bruising along her right shoulder, in precisely the pattern where the hand appears in her photograph. Medical notes indicate these marks would appear overnight, with Elizabeth insisting she hadn't injured herself. The Harmon family's church records contained a curious entry from their pastor, Reverend Thomas Caldwell. 2 weeks before the fire, he visited the home at Mrs. Harmon's request to bless the residents. His private journal, now housed in the church archives, describes an oppressive atmosphere in Elizabeth's room and the child's unsettling behavior. The girl spoke in 2 voices simultaneously, her own childish tone overlaid with something deeper that made my soul shrink within me. When I placed my Bible upon her bed, she began to laugh in a manner no child should be capable of. "I have performed 3 exorcisms in my ministry, but never have I encountered such a seamless melding between vessel and intruder." Perhaps most chilling was the discovery last month of another photograph shown to match the chemical signature of Winslow's development process. Found inside a sealed wall during the demolition of a building that once adjoined his studio, this image shows what appears to be his workroom. Dated by experts to approximately 1 week after Elizabeth's portrait, it reveals his camera equipment and developing area. In the background, barely visible in the shadowed corner, stands a tall figure, indistinct except for his hands, which match exactly the disembodied hand on Elizabeth's shoulder. The figure appears to be looking directly at the camera, though its face remains obscured in darkness. Written on the reverse in Winslow's increasingly erratic handwriting are just 3 words: "It follows me." The current owner of the photograph, who wishes to remain anonymous, reports a recurring phenomenon. Small objects placed near the image are found displaced by morning, always moved precisely 8 inches, Elizabeth's age, from their original position. The photograph's influence extends beyond those who originally encountered it. The current owner, despite initial skepticism, has documented a progression of unusual phenomena. It began with subtle temperature fluctuations, the air surrounding the photograph measuring consistently 7 degrees cooler than the ambient room temperature. Recording equipment placed near the image captures whispered conversations between what sound like a child and an adult male, though the dialogue remains largely unintelligible. Most concerning are the dreams reported by those who sleep in proximity to the photograph. They describe identical nightmares of standing in a Victorian photography studio while a tall figure adjusts equipment, his face perpetually obscured. The figure speaks in reassuring tones about completing the collection and how Elizabeth was only the beginning. Upon waking, these individuals discover the same distinctive bruising pattern on their right shoulders. Elizabeth's pendant has become a focal point for renewed investigation. Jewelry historians identified its craftsmanship as characteristic of Elias Woodruff, a silversmith who created ceremonial pieces for several esoteric societies in late 19th century New England. Woodruff's personal papers, recently donated to Harvard's rare manuscript collection, mention creating 7 identical pendants commissioned by the Threshold Society, a secretive group obsessed with establishing communication across the boundary between worlds. The Society's fragmentary records suggest they identified children with specific sensitivities who could serve as anchors for entities they sought to draw into this world. Elizabeth appears to have been the third such child. The journals cryptically referenced 2 previous attempts that established contact but failed to create permanent passage. Elizabeth was described as the perfect vessel, innocent yet aware of her purpose. The fire that claimed Elizabeth was not, it seems, the end of the story. Insurance investigations from 1902 note peculiar aspects of the blaze. Though her room was consumed, firefighters reported the flames burned in a perfect circle around her bed. More significantly, Elizabeth's body exhibited no actual burns, despite being found within the fire's center. The official cause of death was recorded as asphyxiation, though the examining physician noted her expression appeared eerily peaceful, almost transcendent. Salem town records reveal 7 other children died under mysterious circumstances within 18 months after Elizabeth's death. Each family reported their child had received a gift from an anonymous benefactor, a photograph of themselves they had no memory of posing for. None of these photographs have been recovered, though descriptions from grieving parents mention strange shadows or additional hands visible in the images. Thaddeus Winslow's final whereabouts may have been discovered last year. A remote cabin in the White Mountains, purchased under the name Theodore Winston in 1904, contained a hidden darkroom beneath its floorboards. The space held hundreds of glass plate negatives, methodically organized but never developed. A journal found beside them contains only one repeated sentence, written thousands of times in increasingly disordered handwriting. They come through the camera, but they live in the eyes. Most disturbing is what specialists in 19th century photographic techniques discovered when finally developing those plates. Each shows a different child, smiling at the camera, with the same disembodied hand resting on their right shoulder. The photograph's revelations continue to unfold across unexpected dimensions. Last week, a descendant of Elizabeth Harmon's maternal line contacted our research team after discovering her great-grandmother's locked diary in a family hope chest. Henrietta Cook, Elizabeth's aunt, had maintained silent vigilance over family secrets for decades. Her diary entries reveal a household far more aware of Elizabeth's fate than previously understood. Henrietta writes of overhearing her brother-in-law confessing to her sister, "The arrangement has been made. Father's debts will be settled, but the price." The entry ends abruptly, tear stains blurring the ink. Most significant is Henrietta's account of visiting Elizabeth the night before her birthday sitting. The child appeared unusually composed, methodically arranging her dolls in a semicircle facing away from her bedroom mirror. When questioned about this peculiar arrangement, Elizabeth replied, "They mustn't look at him when he comes through. It hurts their eyes." Henrietta describes waking that night to find Elizabeth standing at the foot of her bed, though she hadn't heard the child enter. She was speaking in that strange doubled voice, like 2 people using the same mouth. She told me, "Aunt Hetty, he says more children will be needed, many more. The doorway is still too narrow." The diary contains pressed flowers from Elizabeth's funeral, lilies with anomalous dark stains that modern testing confirms as photographic developing chemicals, not blood as Henrietta had feared. Professor James Whiting, whose analysis of spirit photography led him to Winslow's case, has identified a curious pattern in the photographer's client records. In the months preceding Elizabeth's portrait, Winslow photographed 6 different subjects who all shared one unusual characteristic: heterochromia, or differently colored eyes. Elizabeth's school records note she possessed this same trait: one brown eye, one pale as winter sky. "The symbolism cannot be dismissed," Professor Whiting wrote in his recent paper. "Heterochromatic eyes have historically represented the ability to perceive multiple worlds simultaneously. In numerous traditions, such individuals were considered to exist in 2 realms at once." The Threshold Society's recovered documents suggest they sought children with this specific trait, believing they were already partially transitioned beings who could serve as conduits. Their rituals involved photographic exposure during precisely calculated astronomical alignments, when the boundaries between worlds grew permeable. The silver content in Elizabeth's pendant has yielded results under spectroscopic analysis that defy conventional explanation. The metal contains trace elements not naturally occurring on Earth, isotopes with molecular structures that quantum physicists describe as theoretically possible but practically impossible under terrestrial conditions. Most recently, sound engineers isolated barely audible words from Elizabeth's lips in the photograph, captured at the exact moment of exposure. Enhanced and clarified, Her whispered message is chilling. He says others will follow. He says I'm opening the way. The disembodied hand continues to trouble experts not merely for its disconnected nature, but for its impossible positioning. The grip it maintains on Elizabeth's shoulder shows tension patterns suggesting it is not merely resting there but actively anchoring itself, or perhaps anchoring her, as though preventing something from pulling her away, or, more disturbingly, preventing her from escaping. As our investigation continues, we face the unsettling possibility that Elizabeth's photograph wasn't documenting a supernatural intrusion into our world, but rather the moment a child was being prepared for extraction from it. The photograph attracted the attention of Dr. Miriam Shelby, a forensic anthropologist specializing in historical cases involving children. After examining the image for 72 hours using specialized equipment, she identified something previously unnoticed: a nearly invisible reflection in Elizabeth's left eye. The corneal reflection captures what Elizabeth was seeing at the exact moment the photograph was taken, Dr. Shelby explained. It's minuscule but unmistakable, a tall figure standing beside the camera. Not Winslow himself, who would have been behind it, but someone else present in the studio. When digitally extracted and enhanced, this reflection reveals a man whose proportions seem subtly wrong: limbs too long, shoulders too narrow. His face remains indistinct except for what appears to be an unnaturally wide smile. Most significantly, his right arm extends not toward Elizabeth, but toward the camera itself, as though reaching into the mechanism. The implications are disturbing, Dr. Shelby noted. If this figure's hand appears on Elizabeth's shoulder within the photograph, yet he's simultaneously captured in her corneal reflection standing across the room, we're forced to consider impossible spatial relationships. Further research into the Threshold Society uncovered their foundational belief that certain rare individuals could exist in multiple locations simultaneously, a phenomenon they called spatial divergence. Their writings describe entities that could project aspects of themselves across distances, particularly during phases of transition between what they termed adjacent realities. Elizabeth's remaining school compositions, preserved by her teacher who sensed something amiss, contain recurring themes of doors and passageways. One essay, simply titled "The Other Side," describes a place where everyone has hands that can reach anywhere they want, and where no one needs to have just one body anymore. Soil samples from the site of Elizabeth's bedroom have yielded trace elements matching the anomalous composition found in her pendant, suggesting the fire that allegedly claimed her life may have involved temperatures and conditions impossible in conventional combustion. Most revealing was a statement from Josephine Winslow, the photographer's niece, recorded in 1959, but sealed until her death last year. She recalls visiting her uncle's studio as a child and seeing Elizabeth on the day of her portrait. "The girl spoke to me while Uncle prepared his camera. She seemed kind but strange, like she was practicing how to act like a child. When I asked about her birthday plans, she tilted her head as though listening to someone I couldn't see, then said, 'Where I'm going? Birthdays last forever because time works differently there.' She touched my face and whispered, 'He wanted me to invite you too, but you don't have the right kind of eyes.' Perhaps most chilling is what thermographic analysis revealed when the photograph was subjected to extreme cold. At temperatures below -40 degrees, previously invisible markings appeared across the entire background, thousands of tiny handprints identical to the one on Elizabeth's shoulder, filling every inch of the supposedly empty space behind her. Each print appears to be reaching outward, as though countless hands are pressing against some invisible barrier, not reaching in toward Elizabeth, but pushing outward from behind the photograph itself, straining to break through into our world. The mystery deepened unexpectedly last month when Elizabeth's great-grandniece Caroline Harmon underwent genetic testing for medical reasons. Her results flagged an anomaly that geneticists initially dismissed as laboratory error. When 3 independent facilities confirmed the finding, specialists were brought in to examine the implications. Approximately 8% of Ms. Harmon's genetic material doesn't correspond to known human DNA sequencing, explained Dr. Vincent Lahiri of the Genome Research Institute. The divergent segments show organizational structures we've never encountered, not mutations of existing genes, but entirely novel formations that our computers struggle to categorize. Caroline permitted our team to examine family medical records, revealing a pattern of unusual conditions throughout the maternal line: hypersensitivity to light, unprecedented resistance to certain pathogens, and most tellingly, heterochromia in nearly 30% of descendants, a trait occurring in less than 1% of the general population. Parish records from the St. Michael's Church contain an overlooked detail about Elizabeth's funeral. Though contemporary accounts described a traditional burial, Reverend Caldwell noted privately that the casket contained only Elizabeth's nightgown, carefully arranged to create the impression of a body beneath. The family insisted on proceeding despite the absence of remains, he wrote. When questioned, Mrs. Harmon responded only that what burned was not her daughter. The mystery took another turn when restoration specialists removed the photograph from its original frame, discovering microscopic writing along the inner edge of the mat board. The text, visible only under magnification, repeats the same phrase in what experts identify as Middle English. They grow stronger with each glimpse. Look away. Burn this. Curiously, meteorological records indicate unusual atmospheric phenomena recorded throughout New England on the evening of Elizabeth's portrait sitting. Multiple weather stations documented unexplained barometric fluctuations and magnetic disturbances that disrupted telegraph communications for nearly 17 minutes, precisely the time frame when Elizabeth's portrait session occurred. Based on Winslow's appointment book, Elizabeth's pendant, though seemingly lost to history, resurfaced in 1987 in a London auction house. The buyer, a collector of occult artifacts who recognized its significance, reported that when photographed, the pendant never appeared in developed images, leaving an empty space on the chain where it should have been visible. Handwriting analysis revealed another unsettling detail. The inscription on the photograph's reverse, Elizabeth's 8th birthday, was not written by any family member. The script matches no known samples from the Harmon household. Specialists confirm it most closely resembles Winslow's handwriting, but with subtle differences suggesting tremendous physical strain during writing, as though the hand was being guided or restrained. Most recently, during a power outage at the archive where the photograph is now kept, security cameras briefly switched to backup systems. For approximately 7 seconds, the digital recording shows Elizabeth's seated figure in the photograph appearing to turn her head slightly toward the camera, while the disembodied hand seems to tighten its grip, movement impossible in a static image, yet clearly documented in footage currently undergoing forensic authentication. We may need to consider that this photograph isn't merely evidence of something that occurred in 1902, but rather an ongoing event, a moment of transition that never fully completed, suspended between completion and possibility for over a century. The custodial staff at the archive have begun reporting unusual occurrences during overnight shifts. 3 separate employees, unaware of each other's experiences, describe the same phenomenon, the distinct sound of a child humming in the storage room where the photograph is kept. The melody, when reproduced independently, was identified by a musicologist as Come Follow, a nearly forgotten children's game song popular in the late 19th century, with lyrics inviting listeners to follow me beyond the trees where no one sees. The photograph itself has undergone subtle but measurable changes. Microscopic analysis shows the position of the disembodied hand has shifted approximately 2 millimeters since documentation began, the fingers now more deeply pressed into Elizabeth's shoulder. More concerning is the gradual fading of certain elements within the image while others remain pristine, as though parts are being selectively erased or withdrawn. Elizabeth's smile, once the most prominent feature, has diminished almost imperceptibly, giving her expression a more ambiguous quality that clinical psychologists now characterize as anticipatory rather than content. Last week, an archivist cataloging materials related to the case discovered a previously overlooked connection. Thaddeus Winslow's mother, before her marriage, worked as a nursemaid in the household of Jeremiah Cook, Elizabeth's grandfather. Parish records indicate she was dismissed abruptly, with household accounts showing a substantial payment described only as compensation for necessary silence. She left Massachusetts shortly thereafter, returning years later with a young son whose father remained unidentified. This connection suggests a generational entanglement between the families that predates Elizabeth's birth and Winslow's photography career. We must consider whether Elizabeth's portrait was the culmination of a plan set in motion decades earlier. The Threshold Society's recovered journals make repeated reference to the patient preparation of vessels across generations, and how true crossing requires bloodlines prepared through multiple passages of the calendrical wheel. Most unsettling is what happened during a recent power failure affecting the climate control systems in the archive. When emergency lighting activated, 2 researchers working late reported seeing condensation form across the photograph's surface. As they watched, the moisture gathered into distinct patterns resembling childlike handwriting. Security footage shows the researchers reacting to something on the photograph, though the writing itself is not visible to cameras. Before the condensation evaporated, one researcher managed to transcribe the message. The door opens both ways now. We have learned your world. Some of us were always your children. Acoustic engineers have installed sensitive equipment in the archive's storage room and captured what they describe as spatial anomalies centered around the photograph. Areas where sound waves behave as though navigating around solid objects that aren't visibly present, creating patterns consistent with multiple figures moving within an area where nothing can be seen. The disembodied hand in Elizabeth's portrait, once interpreted as reaching into our world, now appears in a different light. Perhaps it was not reaching in, but rather the last part of Elizabeth being pulled out, caught forever in the moment of transition between here and elsewhere. The discovery of an ancient glass photographic plate in the archives of the Massachusetts Historical Society has connected Elizabeth's case to an earlier phenomenon. Dated 1887, 15 years before Elizabeth's portrait, this cracked negative shows a photography studio interior that matches descriptions of Winslow's workspace. Seated before the camera is a young boy around 6 years old, dressed in period attire, with the same pendant Elizabeth would later wear. Though his expression is solemn, his eyes appear unfocused, gazing slightly to the left of the camera. The photographer is captured accidentally in reflection on a decorative mirror, a much younger Thaddeus Winslow before his official apprenticeship. Most disturbing is the presence of a small, childlike handprint visible on the glass plate itself, not photographed, but pressed into the emulsion, as though a child had touched the negative during development. Handwritten notes accompanying this plate identify the child as Thomas Whiting, who historical records confirm disappeared 3 days after this sitting. Newspaper accounts describe a desperate search throughout Salem, with witnesses reporting seeing the boy walking hand in hand with an unseen companion. Visible footprints in fresh mud showing the boy's small steps alongside deeper, adult-sized impressions that appeared and disappeared at impossible intervals. Elizabeth's diary, recently uncovered in the collapsed chimney space of the rebuilt Harmon home, contains entries describing conversations with Tommy, whom she identifies as the boy who went before. Her childish handwriting records how Tommy lives in the special place where everyone can reach through walls and says, "I'll understand when I get there." Most significant is her final entry, dated the morning of her portrait sitting. Tommy says the camera helps them see us better. It makes a little hole they can reach through. Today, I get to help make the hole bigger. Sound technicians analyzing the archive recordings have isolated another voice beneath Elizabeth's humming, a young boy singing in counterpoint, creating harmonies impossible for a single vocalist. When these recordings are played in the presence of the glass plate negative, witnesses report the handprint appears to pulse with faint luminescence. Archaeological excavations at the former site of Winslow's studio have unearthed a small chamber beneath the foundation, accessible only through a narrow passage. The walls bear hundreds of handprints in varying sizes, all pressed into a mixture that analysis reveals contains silver nitrate, organic binding agents, and human blood. Dendrochronological dating places the chamber's construction to approximately 1871, 25 years before Winslow officially established his business at that location. The current working theory suggests the Threshold Society had identified specific locations where the boundary between worlds was naturally thinner. They deliberately constructed buildings at these sites and installed photographers who could exploit the peculiar properties of silver-based photographic processes to further weaken these boundaries. Elizabeth and Thomas appear to have been part of a sequence of children, each one making it easier for the next to transition. The photographs weren't merely documenting these transitions, but actively facilitating them, creating momentary apertures between worlds that would gradually expand with each successive subject. What remains unclear is whether these children were victims being harvested or preparation for something larger, an eventual opening wide enough for whatever waited on the other side to emerge fully into our world. The investigation took an eldritch turn when Dr. Helena Morrow, specialist in comparative anatomy, requested permission to examine the disembodied hand using non-invasive spectral imaging. Her findings challenge our understanding of what we've been observing all along. "This isn't a human hand," Dr. Morrow stated unequivocally. The proportions appeared human at first glance, but detailed measurements reveal subtle anatomical impossibilities. The metacarpal structure exhibits forward articulation points that would allow movement no human hand could achieve. The thumb opposition capability exceeds human parameters by 27%. Most distinctively, the hand's dermal ridge patterns, what would create fingerprints, flow in geometrically perfect spirals that Dr. Morrow describes as mathematically precise in ways biological growth simply doesn't produce. The implications are staggering. What appears to be reaching for Elizabeth may not be related to human anatomy at all, but something merely approximating human form, a simulation convincing enough to avoid immediate detection. Comparative analysis with the handprints discovered in Winslow's hidden chamber reveals consistent anatomical anomalies. These weren't human hands pressed into the mixture, but something that only resembled human appendages upon casual inspection. The Threshold Society's remaining documents take on new significance with this revelation. Their private communications refer repeatedly to the worthy exchange, and how what returns may wear the semblance of what departed. Their rituals weren't simply about creating passages, they were facilitating trades, children for entities that could pass as human. Elizabeth's mother's declining mental health following the fire makes terrible sense in this context. Asylum records from 1903 diagnose her with delusional paranoia after she attacked a child in Salem Town Square, screaming that it wore Elizabeth's face but wasn't her. She was institutionalized after insisting repeatedly that they're sending them back wrong. The pendant's unusual composition may have served as a marking mechanism, a way for entities on the other side to identify prepared vessels. The children weren't random selections but carefully cultivated bloodlines, with subtle genetic divergences already present before their transitions. Most alarming is what was discovered when Elizabeth's portrait was examined under ultraviolet light last week. A previously invisible marking system became apparent, tiny symbols forming perfect concentric circles around the chair where she sits. These symbols match no known historical writing system but contain geometric elements reminiscent of astronomical positioning guides. The photograph may not merely document a transition, but actively function as a beacon, a fixed reference point allowing others to navigate to our reality using Elizabeth as their lodestar. Each person who studies the image inadvertently strengthens this signal through their attention. The disembodied hand may not be reaching for Elizabeth at all. It may be reaching for us, using the photograph as a window, patiently waiting as the aperture between worlds gradually widens with each viewing, with each analysis, with each moment of human fascination with the impossible image. We must consider a chilling possibility. Our investigation isn't documenting an historical event. We are actively participating in its conclusion. The revelation came from Dr. Sophia Chen, a quantum physicist who approached our research team after reading our published findings. Her arrival was unexpected, but her credentials impeccable. A specialist in theoretical multiversal boundaries with a background in paranormal energy measurements. "You're all observing the phenomenon incorrectly," Dr. Chen explained, setting up specialized equipment around Elizabeth's photograph. "This isn't about entities crossing over. It's about a photograph capturing a moment of simultaneous existence." Her theory challenges our fundamental understanding of the case. According to Dr. Chen, the Threshold Society hadn't discovered a method for entities to cross between worlds. They'd found a way to photograph moments where a single individual existed in multiple realities simultaneously. Elizabeth didn't vanish, Dr. Chen insisted. She bifurcated. The fire didn't kill her. It was the energetic byproduct of her consciousness dividing across realities. The equipment Dr. Chen brought measures quantum entanglement patterns. When activated near the photograph, it detected something extraordinary, a sustained entanglement field emanating from the image itself, particularly from the space between Elizabeth and the disembodied hand. "The hand belongs to Elizabeth," Dr. Chen said, displaying her readings. "Not our version of Elizabeth, but her other self, the adult she became in an adjacent reality where time moves differently. She's reaching back through to complete the connection that began in 1902. This theory explains why the hand appears anatomically unusual. It evolved under different physical laws. It explains the genetic anomalies in Elizabeth's descendants. They carry markers from two divergent evolutionary paths simultaneously. Most convincing is what happened when Dr. Chen placed an object Elizabeth had owned, a monogrammed hair comb recovered from the Harmon home, near the photograph. The comb began to vibrate at frequencies matching Dr. Chen's quantum readings, and for 7 seconds, the hand in the photograph visibly shifted, reaching an additional centimeter toward the edge of the image frame. She's still trying to complete the transition, Dr. Chen explained. The photographer interrupted the process. Winslow didn't understand what he was documenting. He thought he was helping entities cross over, but he was actually capturing the moment a human consciousness expanded across multiple realities. The children with heterochromia weren't chosen as vessels for other entities. Their unusual eyes were physical manifestations of perceptual abilities that already straddled realities. They could see both worlds simultaneously, making them perfect candidates for complete bifurcation. The Threshold Society wasn't bringing something through from elsewhere. They were helping certain children evolve beyond single reality consciousness. What you're calling the disembodied hand is actually Elizabeth reaching back to ensure her younger self completes the transition properly, Dr. Chen explained. The process began, but never finished. She's trapped between states of being. Part of her consciousness expanded while her physical form remained anchored here. Dr. Chen's instruments recorded energy patterns suggesting the photograph isn't merely a document, it's an active junction point where Elizabeth still exists, simultaneously child and adult, reaching toward herself across a divide that normally separates parallel realities. The haunting truth might be that Elizabeth isn't a victim, but a pioneer, the first partially successful attempt at expanding human consciousness beyond the limitations of a single reality. The team's work with Dr. Chen opened unexpected doors, attracting attention from corners we hadn't anticipated. Among those who reached out was Meredith Harmon, another of Elizabeth's distant relatives from a previously unknown branch of the family. Unlike Caroline, Meredith had no genetic anomalies. Her DNA testing showed perfectly standard human markers. This discrepancy proved illuminating. My grandmother always said our side of the family was deliberately excluded from something important, Meredith explained, sharing yellowed letters exchanged between family members in the 1920s. There was a selective breeding program of sorts within the Harmon line, separating those with the potential from those without. The correspondence revealed the Threshold Society didn't merely identify suitable children, they engineered them across generations. Elizabeth wasn't randomly selected. She represented the culmination of calculated genetic arrangements spanning decades. Her parents' marriage was orchestrated specifically to combine bloodlines carrying latent abilities for multiversal perception. Some family branches were cultivated, Meredith explained, while others, like mine, were deliberately kept separate as control groups. We were the baseline against which they measured their progress. Dental records from Elizabeth's school examinations provided further evidence of her uniqueness. Unlike standard human dentition, her molars exhibited unusual coronal patterns matching no known evolutionary template. The school nurse had noted this peculiarity but attributed it to a developmental anomaly rather than evidence of hybridized genetic inheritance. The Threshold Society's ultimate goal appears more nuanced than previously understood. Their writings describe cultivating humans who could inhabit multiple realities simultaneously, not to surrender our world to outside entities, but to expand human consciousness beyond single reality limitations. They weren't summoning others in, Dr. Chen concluded after reviewing the Society's technical diagrams. They were helping certain humans expand outward. Most revealing was what happened when we located another of Winslow's photographs, this one showing a teenage boy with the same pendant as Elizabeth, taken approximately 6 months after her portrait. Placing both images side by side triggered an immediate reaction. The disembodied hand in Elizabeth's portrait shifted visibly, reaching not toward her shoulder anymore but toward the second photograph, as though attempting to bridge the gap between images. They're connected, Dr. Chen observed, measuring energy fluctuations between the photographs. Each child was part of a sequence, not isolated transitions but components of a larger pattern intended to create a stable network across realities. The quantum readings suggest the photographs themselves function as junction points, places where the boundaries between parallel worlds grow thin enough for communication or even transfer. The silver in the photographic emulsion, combined with the specific geometry of the portraits, creates what Dr. Chen calls sustained quantum entanglement fields. The true horror may not be that Elizabeth was taken from our world, but that part of her consciousness remains trapped between realities, neither fully here nor fully there, reaching perpetually across a divide she can perceive but never completely cross. She isn't trying to pull us through, Dr. Chen concluded after 3 days of continuous measurements. She's asking for help completing her own transition. The breakthrough occurred during a thunderstorm that knocked out power to the archive building. Emergency generators activated, but for 17 seconds, Elizabeth's photograph was subjected to complete darkness, followed by the harsh illumination of backup lights cycling on. Security footage captured what happened next. The image began to emit a faint luminescence visible only on infrared cameras, a gentle pulsing that synchronized perfectly with the storm's lightning strikes. As researchers hurried to the storage room, their recording devices captured a sound beneath the thunder. A child's voice, impossibly clear, speaking words that sent shivers through everyone present. "The door is almost wide enough now. I can see you as clearly as you see me." Digital analysis confirmed the voice originated from within the photograph itself, vibrating through the paper at frequencies that shouldn't be physically possible. More disturbing was the thermal mapping of the storage room, which showed a child-sized heat signature standing directly in front of the photograph, invisible to the naked eye but unmistakable on the thermal equipment. When Dr. Chen arrived, she brought an experimental device developed for quantum entanglement studies. "This might be our only chance," she explained, setting up the apparatus around the photograph. "The storm's electromagnetic properties have temporarily strengthened the connection between realities. If Elizabeth has been trying to complete her transition for over a century, we might be able to help her finish what began in 1902. The equipment created a controlled field designed to stabilize quantum fluctuations. As it activated, Elizabeth's image began to change subtly, her smile softening, her eyes focusing on something beyond the camera. The disembodied hand became more distinct, the sleeve extending further into visibility. Most remarkable was the pendant around Elizabeth's neck, which began to emit a soft blue luminescence visible even to unaided eyes. Spectroscopic analysis showed it radiating at wavelengths matching precisely those detected in the anomalous soil samples from the site of her bedroom fire. "She's still there," Dr. Chen whispered, watching her readings, suspended between states of being for over a century, neither fully here nor fully there. The photograph didn't capture her transition, it interrupted it. As the storm intensified outside, something extraordinary happened. For approximately 43 seconds, two distinct versions of Elizabeth became visible within the photograph. The child we had always seen, and superimposed over her, the transparent image of a woman in her 20s with the same distinctive heterochromatic eyes. The adult Elizabeth's hand aligned perfectly with the disembodied hand that had puzzled researchers for years. "It's not a disconnected hand," Dr. Chen realized. "It's her own hand, reaching across time and dimensional boundaries, trying to guide her younger self through the transition." The implications staggered everyone present. Elizabeth wasn't taken by some external force. She had evolved into something that could exist across multiple realities simultaneously, and had been trying for over a century to help her younger self complete the journey that Winslow's photograph had inadvertently interrupted. The energy field Dr. Chen created began to destabilize as the storm reached its peak. Her equipment sparked with uncontained quantum fluctuations, and the photograph's surface rippled like disturbed water. The adult Elizabeth's transparent form bent toward her childhood self, her expression conveying centuries of patient waiting finally nearing conclusion. "We need to make a decision," Dr. Chen shouted over the building resonance. "If we continue, we're not merely observing a historical event, we're actively completing it. Elizabeth has been suspended in this partial transition for over a century. We can either help her complete it, or attempt to terminate the process entirely." The implications stunned everyone present. Historical investigation had transformed into direct intervention in something beyond conventional understanding. Dr. Winters stepped forward, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. "Consider what we're witnessing. This isn't an invasion or possession. It's human evolution. Consciousness expanding beyond single reality constraints. Elizabeth wasn't a victim, she was a pioneer." The photograph began vibrating, its surface undulating as though something pressed against it from within. The heat signature on thermal cameras expanded, taking the distinct shape of a woman with her hand extended toward the photograph, mirroring the position of the hand that had haunted researchers for months. "She's been trying to save herself," Caroline Harmon whispered, her heterochromatic eyes, one brown, one pale blue, fixed on the phenomenon. "Not pulling herself back into our limited existence, but completing her expansion beyond it." A decision crystallized. They would help Elizabeth complete what began in 1902, not out of fear, but recognition that they were witnessing something profound about human potential. Dr. Chen calibrated her equipment to amplify rather than contain the quantum fluctuations. "Elizabeth," she spoke directly to the photograph, "we understand now. We're going to help you finish your transition." The room temperature plummeted as energy concentrated around the photograph. Both versions of Elizabeth became more distinct, the child smiling with new understanding, the adult form nodding in gratitude. The disembodied hand that had appeared disconnected for over a century now clearly belonged to the adult Elizabeth, reaching through the dimensional barrier. For 27 seconds, the two forms overlapped completely, creating a singular Elizabeth who existed simultaneously as child and adult, inhabiting multiple points in her own timeline. Then, with a soft sigh that registered on audio equipment but was felt more than heard, the image transformed one final time. Where once sat a child with a mysterious hand upon her shoulder, now appeared a complete portrait, Elizabeth as a young woman, whole and integrated, smiling with the serene confidence of someone who exists beyond conventional limitations. The hand that had seemed disconnected now attached properly to her adult form, resting not on her shoulder, but extended slightly forward, as if reaching toward the viewer. The photograph had finally captured what it was always meant to, not a moment of intrusion or displacement, but of transcendence. Elizabeth Harmon had become the first documented human to evolve beyond single reality existence. Her consciousness expanded across multiple dimensions of being, and now, over a century later, her transition was finally complete. In the days following Elizabeth's completed transition, subtle changes manifested throughout the archive. Photographs previously documenting empty rooms in Winslow's studio now revealed shadowy figures at their edges, not threatening presences, but patient observers. The sealed glass plate negative of Thomas Whiting showed the boy's expression transformed from solemn vacancy to peaceful recognition, as though he too had finally completed his interrupted journey. Dr. Chen's equipment continued recording quantum fluctuations around Elizabeth's photograph, but the pattern had changed. Rather than the chaotic, desperate pulses of something trapped between states, the readings showed ordered, harmonious waves, communication rather than struggle. When analyzed through specialized algorithms, these patterns yielded fragmentary messages. Others waiting, help them complete. Doorways exist in all silver portraits. Find the children with mismatched eyes. Caroline Harmon reported dreams of conversation with her distant ancestor, not as haunting visitations, but as gentle guidance. She explains things I can't fully comprehend in waking life, Caroline told researchers, about how consciousness can exist across multiple planes simultaneously, how human perception is unnecessarily limited to single reality experience. Most significant was the effect on the other photographs from Winslow's collection. Placed near Elizabeth's completed image, they began showing similar transformations, disembodied hands becoming whole, disconnected limbs resolving into complete figures. The transitions weren't alarming but clarifying, as though Elizabeth's completion had created a template others could follow. The Threshold Society's recovered journals now read less like the ravings of occultists and more like primitive attempts to document quantum mechanics through metaphysical language. Their ritual preparations appeared to be early efforts at creating controlled environments for consciousness expansion across dimensional boundaries, crude but surprisingly effective given their limited scientific understanding. Historical records revealed a pattern previously overlooked. In years following Elizabeth's apparent death, dozens of children with heterochromia disappeared throughout New England. Authorities attributed these cases to illness, accident, or family relocation, but newspaper archives showed a consistent element. In each home, a photograph of the missing child remained, often described by family members as somehow different after their disappearance. Dr. Miriam Shelby's forensic team began collecting these photographs, finding that under the right conditions, they too showed evidence of partial transitions, children caught between states of being, waiting for the process Elizabeth had finally completed. What we're witnessing isn't supernatural in the traditional sense, Dr. Chen explained to assembled researchers. It's evolutionary, consciousness expanding beyond four-dimensional constraints. Elizabeth wasn't the first to attempt this transition, but she may have been the first to create a stable pathway others can follow. The most profound revelation came when Caroline underwent another genetic analysis. The anomalous 8% of non-human DNA previously identified had changed, not in sequence but in expression. Previously dormant genes had activated, initiating subtle anatomical changes that medical experts couldn't fully categorize. "I can see them now," Caroline whispered during examination, her heterochromatic eyes fixed on empty spaces around the laboratory. All the others who started but never finished. They've been waiting for someone to understand. The photograph's evolution continues after Elizabeth's completed transition. The image now radiates subtle warmth detectable only by those with heterochromatic eyes, who report seeing faint doorways hovering around its edges when viewed from certain angles. Caroline Harmon has become central to our understanding as her genetic activation accelerates daily. The transition isn't limited to the past, Caroline explained during yesterday's session. Elizabeth was simply the first documented case, but the potential exists within bloodlines across generations. The Threshold Society understood this incompletely. They thought they were creating doorways for external entities when instead they were activating dormant human potential. Professor Everett from quantum anthropology arrived last week, bringing comparative documentation from other cases worldwide. His research reveals similar photographs throughout history, each showing children with mismatched eyes and what appeared to be partial manifestations from elsewhere. Most compelling are cave paintings from southern France dating back 17,000 years, depicting human figures with differently colored eyes and elongated limbs reaching between separate scenes. This capacity has always existed within certain human lineages, Everett theorized. What the Threshold Society stumbled upon was merely a technological means to facilitate a natural evolutionary process using silver nitrate's unique quantum properties. The Winslow camera itself has been located in a private collection in Vienna, untouched for decades. Initial testing shows the brass casing contains unusual isotopic ratios, particularly around the aperture mechanism. When light passes through this opening, spectrographic analysis reveals frequency shifts that momentarily bring certain wavelengths from beyond normal perception into visible range. Most illuminating are Elizabeth's own words, now consistently translated from the quantum fluctuations surrounding her photograph. She describes existence across multiple realities as seeing through many eyes simultaneously, and explains how consciousness can branch while maintaining cohesion across seemingly separate dimensions. Time appears differently when perceived from multiple vantage points. Her message reads, "What seemed to me a century of waiting was also an instantaneous transition. Both experiences occurred simultaneously." The remaining Threshold Society documents, when re-examined through this new understanding, reveal their ultimate aim, not to communicate with otherworldly entities, but to evolve humanity beyond single reality constraints. Their final manuscript, previously dismissed as delirious fantasy, now reads as prophetic. When sufficient transitions complete, the boundaries between realities will naturally thin for all perception. What begins with the few shall eventually transform the many. Caroline has begun exhibiting abilities that defy conventional explanation. Objects in her vicinity occasionally shift position without apparent movement. More remarkably, she can perceive events moments before they occur, describing them with perfect accuracy, not prediction but simultaneous perception across different temporal points. "I'm not seeing the future," she clarified. "I'm experiencing multiple present moments concurrently, including those you haven't reached yet in your linear perception. As our research continues, we face profound questions about human potential and the nature of reality itself." Elizabeth's case suggests we may be witnessing not an isolated paranormal phenomenon, but the earliest documented evidence of humanity's next evolutionary step, consciousness expanding beyond the limitations of single reality existence. The archive has become more than a research facility. It's transformed into a nexus point where realities intersect with increasing frequency. Those working closely with Elizabeth's photograph have begun experiencing shared perceptions, momentary glimpses of corridors that shouldn't exist, echoing footsteps from empty rooms, and most consistently, children's voices engaged in conversation just beyond hearing range. Dr. Chen's instruments record these phenomena not as paranormal disturbances, but as localized stability in quantum fluctuations, areas where multiple dimensional states achieve temporary harmony. "These aren't ghosts," she explains to the expanding research team, "but moments where parallel realities align closely enough for cross-perceptual experiences." The Harmon family records, combined with Winslow's recovered journals and Threshold Society documents, reveal a pattern previously obscured by their fragmentation. The society had identified 7 specific bloodlines carrying genetic markers for multidimensional perception. Elizabeth's line was merely the most successful of their cultivation efforts. They were creating a constellation, Caroline explains during one of her increasingly lucid moments. Each child with heterochromia represented a fixed point anchoring connections between realities. Elizabeth wasn't just completing her own transition. She was stabilizing an entire network that had remained dormant for over a century. The disembodied hands appearing in Winslow's photographs weren't reaching through from elsewhere. They were reaching across from parallel versions of the same children, attempting to synchronize consciousness across multiple incarnations simultaneously. The photography process, with its silver nitrate compounds and precisely calculated exposure times, created momentary apertures where these connections could establish. Soil samples from each location where a child disappeared show identical anomalous compositions, not evidence of some otherworldly intrusion, but the electromagnetic residue of consciousness expanding beyond single-dimensional constraints. The fires reported in many cases weren't destroying evidence, but manifesting the enormous energy released during incomplete transitions. Dr. Winter's psychological analysis of Elizabeth's expression in the photograph has evolved with this new understanding. She wasn't resigned to something happening to her, Dr. Winters concludes, but concentrated on something she was actively doing, attempting to synchronize multiple versions of herself across dimensional boundaries. The pendant's unusual composition makes perfect sense when examined through quantum principles. The mathematically precise pattern of molecules created a stable reference point her consciousness could orient around during the transition process. Each child wore an identical pendant for precisely this purpose. Most revealing was the discovery that Thaddeus Winslow himself possessed heterochromia, carefully concealed in all known photographs of him. He wasn't merely documenting these transitions, he was attempting to facilitate his own, using his camera as both tool and gateway. The architecture of his studio, with its precise measurements and curious angles, now appears deliberately designed to enhance these dimensional apertures. The hidden chamber beneath, with its hundreds of handprints, wasn't documentation of entities reaching through, but Winslow's attempts to create a navigational system for consciousness traversing dimensional boundaries. As the research team delves deeper into these interconnected mysteries, the lines between observer and participant blur. Those spending significant time with the photographs report increasingly vivid dreams of conversations with the children, not as ghostly encounters, but as orientation sessions, preparing them for expanded perceptual abilities awakening within themselves. The research team assembled in the archive as twilight painted the windows in deepening shades of violet. Elizabeth's photograph, now radiating a gentle warmth perceptible to everyone present, had become the centerpiece of an arrangement that included 6 other portraits from Winslow's collection, each showing a child with heterochromatic eyes, each with previously disembodied limbs, now resolved into complete figures. "The constellation is almost complete," Caroline whispered, her own mismatched eyes reflecting subtle luminescence that hadn't been there weeks before. "They've been waiting for recognition, not discovery, but understanding." Dr. Chen's instruments recorded quantum harmonics, reaching unprecedented stability. The photographs, arranged in a precise geometric pattern mapped from the Threshold Society's final diagrams, created resonance patterns that reinforced rather than disrupted each other. The air between them seemed to shimmer with possibilities. "Elizabeth wasn't trying to escape our reality or invade it," Dr. Winters observed, reviewing notes spanning months of investigation. She was attempting to synchronize consciousness across multiple versions simultaneously, to exist in all possible iterations of herself without fragmentation. Professor Everett placed the final photograph, a portrait of young Thomas Whiting, in the single remaining position. The effect was immediate and undeniable. The room's temperature stabilized perfectly between warm and cool. Sound acquired crystalline clarity, and colors appeared somehow richer, as though additional spectra had become perceptible. "They were pioneers," Meredith Harmon said, touching her family pendant, an exact replica of Elizabeth's, recreated from historical specifications. Not victims of some supernatural intrusion, but explorers of human potential beyond single reality constraints. The images began pulsing in unison, their silver content reacting to the harmonized quantum field. What had appeared as disembodied hands now clearly showed complete figures existing in dimensional overlays, children simultaneously present in multiple states of being. Dr. Chen's voice remained steady despite the extraordinary manifestation surrounding them. This was never about haunting or possession. The Threshold Society glimpsed humanity's evolutionary potential, but lacked the scientific framework to describe it. What they interpreted as communication with external entities was actually consciousness branching across multiplicities of self. The photographs levitated slightly, hovering inches above the table's surface. Between them formed visible connections, not supernatural energies but stabilized quantum entanglements made perceptible by their unprecedented strength. "They've been waiting for us to complete what began in 1902, Caroline said, stepping into the center of the arrangement. Not to join them elsewhere, but to recognize that elsewhere exists simultaneously with here, that consciousness need not be confined to singular existence. As the quantum field reached maximum stability, the boundaries between observer and observed dissolved. Each researcher experienced momentary perception through multiple perspectives simultaneously, seeing the room from different positions, understanding concepts through varied frameworks, existing briefly across branching possibilities of themselves." Elizabeth's voice, no longer translated through instruments but clear to everyone present, filled the space without sound. "The children were never lost. We were becoming more than singularities. Your recognition completes what began with our transitions. Humanity evolves not by leaving reality behind, but by embracing the multiplicity of realities that have always existed simultaneously." The photograph that started everything, a smiling girl with what appeared to be a disembodied hand upon her shoulder, had revealed not a supernatural mystery, but a glimpse into human potential that extended beyond the limitations of singular existence. The revelation crystallized during a midnight vigil when the researchers synchronized two distinct archival discoveries. Elizabeth's mother kept a coded journal using a cipher Dr. Winters finally deciphered, while Helena found tucked within Winslow's camera a thin strip of exposed film never before processed. When developed under quantum-stabilized conditions, this film showed not a photograph but a sequence, Elizabeth transitioning between states. In the first frame, she appears as we've always seen her. In subsequent microsecond exposures, her form shifts through 23 distinct variations of herself at different ages, each one existing simultaneously in parallel states of being. But the final frame reveals what the Threshold Society truly discovered. Elizabeth looking directly at the camera, her heterochromatic eyes reflecting light that isn't present in the studio, her face showing neither fear nor resignation, but profound recognition. Behind her stands not one figure, but many, translucent, overlapping versions of herself at different ages, each with a hand extended in precisely the same position. The disembodied hand was never disconnected. It was simply the only part of Elizabeth's multidimensional existence dense enough to register on the photographic plate during that split second of transition. The Threshold Society wasn't creating doorways for outside entities, Dr. Chen whispered, studying the sequence. They discovered that certain humans naturally exist across multiple dimensional planes simultaneously. Children with heterochromia weren't chosen as vessels. They were already perceiving across realities from birth. Elizabeth's mother's decoded journal confirmed this understanding. "My daughter speaks of her other selves as though they're as real as her toys. Yesterday she told me how in another life she's already grown, reaching back to help herself understand what she truly is." The society hadn't been conducting occult rituals, but primitive attempts at quantum amplification, creating conditions where naturally multidimensional children could fully integrate their fragmented consciousness across parallel existences. The photograph wasn't documenting a haunting, but capturing the precise moment when Elizabeth almost achieved complete multidimensional synchronization. Winslow's flash interrupted this process, freezing her between states, partially transcended but incomplete, reaching eternally toward integration. The fires reported after these portrait sessions weren't destroying evidence, Caroline explained, her own heterochromatic eyes now perceiving across boundaries with increasing clarity. They were energy discharges from failed synchronizations, the electromagnetic aftermath of consciousness attempting to harmonize across dimensional planes. Most profound was what the researchers discovered in Elizabeth's mother's final journal entry, written the night after the fire. There was no body because she didn't die. She simply exists differently now. I held her nightgown and felt her presence surrounding me like water, whispering that someday we would understand, that what appeared as death was merely transformation, that she now experiences all possible versions of herself simultaneously, child, adult, elder, all lives unlived, now being lived in concert, that she reaches back not in haunting, but in invitation. The true nature of the photograph's mystery wasn't supernatural intrusion, but evolutionary emergence. The first documented case of human consciousness transcending single reality constraints, captured forever in that moment of becoming. As the team prepared findings for wider scientific scrutiny, subtle changes manifested throughout the archive building. Staff reported heightened perceptual experiences, colors appearing more vibrant, sounds carrying emotional resonance beyond normal hearing, occasional glimpses of spaces existing alongside familiar corridors, but somehow occupying the same physical location. The most profound transformation affected those with direct exposure to the photographs. 3 researchers discovered their eyes developing heterochromia, pigmentation shifts occurring gradually over weeks, one iris darkening while the other lightened to pale blue. Medical examinations revealed no pathology but detected unusual activity in the visual cortex, processing information from spectra theoretically invisible to human perception. "We aren't being changed against our will," Dr. Winters explained to concerned colleagues. "The photographs are acting as catalysts, activating latent potential that has always existed within certain genetic lineages. Not everyone exhibits these changes, only those carrying dormant markers similar to Elizabeth's." Museums and private collections worldwide began reporting anomalies in period photographs, particularly portraits from the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Images previously showing single subjects now revealed partial manifestations in the backgrounds, not spectral disturbances but figures existing in dimensional adjacency, visible only from certain viewing angles or under specific lighting conditions. The most significant development came when Caroline Harmon located 7 living descendants from the original bloodlines the Threshold Society had identified. Each possessed heterochromia from birth and reported lifelong experiences of seeing overlapping worlds they had previously attributed to imagination or dismissed as hallucination. When these individuals gathered at the archive, their combined presence created unprecedented stability in the quantum field surrounding the photographs. "We're witnessing the awakening of an evolutionary branch that has existed alongside conventional human development for thousands of years," Professor Everett told the assembled team. "These individuals naturally perceive across multiple realities simultaneously. What appeared supernatural is simply perception beyond conventional limits." The scientific community remains divided. Traditional materialists dismiss the findings as elaborate self-delusion or instrumentation errors, while quantum physicists recognize patterns consistent with theoretical models of multiversal boundaries. Geneticists have identified specific chromosomal markers present in all affected individuals, sequences previously cataloged as non-coding junk DNA, now recognized as dormant perceptual adaptations. Elizabeth's case has transformed from historical curiosity into profound evolutionary documentation. The girl with the disembodied hand on her shoulder wasn't captured in a moment of supernatural encounter, but during humanity's first recorded evolutionary leap beyond single reality perception, evidence that human consciousness can exist across multiple dimensional planes simultaneously when fully integrated. "We stand at the threshold, not of something invading our world," Dr. Chen told journalists carefully selected for their scientific credibility, "but of recognizing that human perception has always contained the potential to experience multiple realities concurrently." Elizabeth Harmon wasn't the first to achieve this integration, merely the first whose transition was photographically documented during that brief moment between singular and multidimensional existence. As research continues, the question remains not whether these perceptual expansions are real, but what they reveal about human potential that has remained dormant throughout recorded history, awaiting only recognition to awaken within those carrying the genetic inheritance of heterochromatic visionaries who have always seen beyond conventional limitations. The photograph has become a window rather than a mystery, teaching us something fundamental about humanity's potential. During the final research session, a remarkable phenomenon occurred as the team prepared to conclude their investigation. Elizabeth's image began to change not just for those with heterochromia, but for every observer, revealing her complete form across multiple ages simultaneously, existing in quantum superposition within a single frame. "We've been asking the wrong question all along," Dr. Chen realized, watching the transformation. "We wondered what the photograph captured, when we should have asked what it continued to create." The true purpose of the Threshold Society emerged from fragmentary records assembled from 7 different archives. They weren't merely documenting transitions or facilitating them, they were recording evolutionary markers for future generations. Elizabeth's portrait wasn't anomalous. It was intentionally designed as a trigger mechanism, activating dormant genetic potential in those who studied it with sufficient attention and openness. The photograph isn't just evidence of multidimensional consciousness, Caroline explained, her heterochromatic eyes now perceiving far beyond conventional limitations. It's a technological catalyst, encoded with quantum patterns that resonate with compatible neural structures in certain observers. This explains why researchers examining the image developed heterochromia and expanded perception, not through supernatural influence but through quantum resonance activating dormant genetic potential. The photograph functions as both document and activation key, recording Elizabeth's transition while simultaneously creating conditions for others to follow her evolutionary path. After careful consideration, the team decided against either suppressing their findings or seeking widespread publicity. Instead, they established the Threshold Research Foundation, dedicated to identifying individuals with natural multidimensional perception and helping them integrate these experiences without fear or misdiagnosis. Elizabeth's portrait now resides in a specially designed chamber within the Foundation's headquarters, accessible only to those genetically predisposed to multidimensional perception. It serves not as evidence to be studied, but as a developmental tool for those beginning their own perceptual expansion. The disembodied hand that puzzled researchers for so long is now recognized not as reaching in from elsewhere, but reaching across from when else. Elizabeth's consciousness extending through temporal dimensions as naturally as we extend our arms through spatial ones. Perhaps most profound was the message Elizabeth communicated during the final observation session, perceived simultaneously by everyone present regardless of genetic predisposition. What appears impossible from a single perspective becomes inevitable when perceived across multiple dimensions simultaneously. I wasn't taken from your world but expanded beyond its limitations. The hand you see isn't disconnected, you simply weren't perceiving the reality where it connects. Evolution doesn't always move forward in time. Sometimes it moves sideways across possibilities. The smiling girl from 1902, captured in that moment between singular existence and multidimensional becoming, offers not a warning about supernatural intrusion, but an invitation to recognize the fuller spectrum of human potential that has always existed just beyond conventional perception. Her legacy lives not in fear, but in possibility, the understanding that consciousness need not be confined to singular existence, and that what we call reality may simply be one dimension of experience among countless others, all existing simultaneously for those with eyes to perceive them. The research team gathered for what would be their final formal examination of Elizabeth's photograph. Outside, autumn leaves drifted past windows as daylight faded, casting the archive in amber hues that seemed to blur the boundaries between present and past. The photograph lay centered upon a specially constructed table of black walnut, the same wood used in Winslow's camera housing, creating a subtle resonance that Caroline claimed helped stabilize the dimensional aperture. "There's something we haven't considered," Dr. Winters said softly, her hand hovering inches above the image without touching it. "We've been so focused on Elizabeth's transformation that we overlooked what this means for human history more broadly." She gestured toward a timeline they had constructed along the wall. Cases of multidimensional perception documented across centuries, but dismissed as mysticism, hallucination, or madness. Cave paintings showing overlapping realities, Renaissance accounts of saints existing in multiple places simultaneously, Victorian mediums whose abilities defied conventional explanation. Elizabeth wasn't the first evolutionary branch toward multidimensional consciousness, Professor Everett continued, completing her thought. She represents the first technologically documented case of something that has been emerging naturally throughout human development. Dr. Chen's instruments recorded fluctuations suggesting the photograph was reaching a state of unprecedented stability. "The quantum signature has changed," she observed. "It's no longer fluctuating between states but achieving permanent harmony across multiple dimensional planes." This transformation coincided with a curious phenomenon reported by museums worldwide. Photographs from the period were changing. Subjects previously captured in rigid Victorian poses now appeared more dynamic, with subtle shifts in expression visible when viewed from different angles, as though the images had become four-dimensional objects compressed into two-dimensional space. Meredith Harmon placed Elizabeth's recreated pendant beside the photograph, watching as the silver alloy resonated with matching frequencies. My grandmother always said our family carried the sight that sees around corners. I thought it was just superstition until now. The pendant began rotating slowly without physical contact, aligning precisely with quantum field patterns Dr. Chen's instruments detected surrounding the photograph. This alignment created momentary windows of transparency in the air above the image, glimpses into adjacent realities where other versions of the research team conducted similar investigations under subtly different circumstances. "We're all connected across versions of ourselves," Caroline whispered, her heterochromatic eyes perceiving these parallel existences with increasing clarity. Elizabeth understood this in 1902. She wasn't reaching from darkness toward light, but helping integrate consciousness that naturally exists across all possible versions simultaneously. As twilight deepened outside, the photograph manifested its final revelation, not through dramatic transformation but gentle clarification. The disembodied hand that had launched their investigation gradually resolved to show not a spectral intrusion, but Elizabeth's own hand from her adult self, reaching across temporal dimensions to guide her childhood consciousness toward integration. The true nature of the photograph finally emerged. Not a gateway for external entities or evidence of supernatural visitation, but humanity's first technological documentation of its own evolutionary potential. Consciousness expanding beyond singular existence toward the multidimensional perception that represents not our distant future but our awakening present. The team gathers in silence as the last rays of sunset fill the archive room, casting elongated shadows across the weathered floors. Elizabeth's photograph rests in a newly crafted frame of silver and walnut, its glass specially treated to maintain the quantum resonance field that now surrounds it permanently. Dr. Chen switches off her equipment for the final time. "Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved," she says, but understood. Elizabeth wasn't trying to escape her reality or invade ours. She simply showed us that the boundaries we perceive are illusions of limited consciousness. Around the world, reports continue to emerge of individuals developing heterochromia spontaneously after prolonged exposure to certain 19th century photographs. The awakening spreads not like contagion, but like recognition, dormant awareness stirring in those genetically predisposed to perceive beyond single reality constraints. The Threshold Research Foundation now maintains a registry of 713 confirmed cases of multidimensional perception, with individuals from 6 continents reporting identical experiences, seeing overlapping versions of reality, perceiving events before they occur, and occasionally influencing physical objects through concentrated awareness. What once would have been dismissed as paranormal claims are now documented with scientific precision. Caroline Harmon touches the photograph one last time before it travels to the specially constructed vault where it will be preserved. "Elizabeth completed her journey," she murmurs, "and in doing so, helped us begin ours." The final analysis reveals why Elizabeth appears to be smiling in her portrait. It wasn't resignation or fear, but profound recognition. The moment a child realized she existed across multiple dimensions simultaneously, reaching toward integration across realities that most humans perceive as separate. The disembodied hand wasn't reaching for her. It was her reaching across time and possibility toward herself. The photograph will remain accessible only to researchers with proper genetic screening and psychological preparation. Not out of fear of supernatural consequence, but because exposure triggers neurological changes in susceptible individuals, activating perceptual abilities that require guidance to integrate properly. As the team disperses to continue their work separately, they notice one final transformation in Elizabeth's image. The background, previously a standard photographer's backdrop, now shows subtle variations when viewed from different angles. Glimpses of the many realities Elizabeth now inhabits simultaneously. Professor Everett places the original case notes in the archive's permanent collection. "We didn't solve a supernatural mystery," he reflects. "We documented the first technologically captured evidence of human evolutionary potential that has always existed within us." The photograph that began as a disturbing anomaly, a smiling girl with a disconnected hand upon her shoulder, ends as something far more profound, a window into human consciousness beyond the limitations we've accepted as reality. Elizabeth's smile now seems not enigmatic but welcoming, inviting those with eyes to see that existence has always been more expansive than our singular perception allows. Perhaps the greatest revelation is the simplest. The boundaries between worlds have always been permeable for those with the ability to perceive across them. Elizabeth wasn't haunting our reality, but expanding into the fullness of her own multidimensional existence, leaving behind a photographic invitation for others to recognize the same potential within themselves. Another photograph, another dark secret revealed. Until next time, this has been Shadow Frames.